She handed over her first-class ticket in silence. Pressed suit, polished heels, not a strand out of place. The agent looked her over, scanned the pass, then frowned like something didn't add up. Moments later, she was told her seat had been reassigned. No explanation, no apology. But what they didn't know was who she really was. And one quiet decision later, the airline would never be the same. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like, share this video, and subscribe to the channel to help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Your support means the world to us and inspires us to create even more engaging content. Thank you. The airport smelled of new carpet and recycled air. Danielle Parker walked past the glass sliding doors of Terminal C at Charlotte Douglas, her steps measured and quiet. Her black leather carry-on rolled evenly behind her, each wheel whispering across the tiled floor. She wore a slate gray blazer, pearl earrings, and a calm she had practiced her whole life. It wasn't her first flight, it wasn't her first business trip, but it was the first time in a while she had allowed herself to feel, just a little, like she belonged. At the first-class counter, the line was short, 3 passengers ahead of her. White, middle-aged. One was already sipping from a Starbucks cup, the other 2 chatting about golf as if the world didn't exist outside their private fairway. When it was her turn, Danielle smiled. "Good morning," she said, offering her boarding pass and ID with both hands. Rachel Thornton didn't smile back. She had the stiff politeness of someone who had been trained to smile but had stopped believing in it. Rachel scanned the barcode, her lips pressing together, then glanced up and down at Danielle. "I'm going to need to see your ID again," she said, already holding the passport in her hand. Danielle blinked but said nothing. Rachel clicked a few keys on her terminal, then reached for the desk phone. "Just a moment," she said, eyes on the screen but not really reading. Danielle shifted slightly. Behind her, someone chuckled. Light, easy. She turned just enough to see a man in khaki shorts and a wrinkled polo shirt step into line. He carried nothing but a phone and a half-empty Coke bottle. When Rachel hung up, she looked at Danielle and offered a tight-lipped nod. "There's been a reassignment. Your seat's no longer available. Something about a system update." Danielle didn't speak. "We can move you to economy or put you on the next flight in about 3 hours?" The man in shorts stepped forward, ticket in hand. Rachel smiled. "Welcome aboard, sir," she said, scanning his pass without even glancing at his ID. Danielle's fingers tightened around the handle of her bag. She didn't argue. She didn't ask for a manager. Instead, she turned and walked back toward the seating area. She found a bench near the corner of the lounge, not too close to the windows, not too far from the noise. She sat down slowly. The leather seat was cold. She opened her tote and pulled out a worn, brown notebook, creased at the edges, the pages soft from years of being thumbed through. Her father's handwriting was neat, deliberate. He used to write notes to himself after his tours, quiet reminders that life back home would be a different kind of war. She found the last page. The ink had faded in places, but the line remained. "You don't need to shout. Just don't forget who you are." She closed the notebook, staring straight ahead. A flight was boarding across the terminal, the call echoing over the PA. People moved, gathered, disappeared. No one looked at her. No one ever did. Danielle didn't know it yet, but something had shifted. A line had been crossed. Quietly, maybe, casually, but it would not stay buried. The woman behind the desk had pushed a name off a list, but in doing so, she had pulled something else to the surface, and it was watching now, listening, waiting. Danielle unlocked the door with the same rhythm she had every Thursday evening. 2 turns of the key, a small push with her shoulder. The apartment greeted her with silence, except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the old radiator pipes. It was a modest 1-bedroom on the edge of Charlotte's southern suburbs. Nothing flashy, just safe, just quiet. She set her bag down gently, took off her heels, and walked barefoot across the hardwood floor to the kitchen. The fridge was dotted with sticky notes, upcoming meetings, a reminder to call her mother, a list of groceries she hadn't gotten around to buying. In the top corner, a yellow note she never moved read, "Remember who you are." She sat at the dining table, still in her blazer, and pulled the boarding pass from her purse. It was still there, creased but intact. First class, row 2A, Danielle Parker, clear as day. She opened her laptop, scrolled through her emails. The confirmation was still in her inbox, time-stamped and accurate. Seat assigned, TSA pre-check verified. No errors, no alerts. And yet, she'd been told it wasn't hers. No apology, no explanation, just reassigned. She had replayed the words in her head during the drive home. Your seat has been reassigned due to an internal update. What kind of update unassigned a paying passenger and left her in a chair near the window with no voice, no recourse? She rubbed her temples and closed her eyes. For a moment, her breath caught, as if someone had pulled her back in time. She was 12 again. It was summer, sticky and loud, and she was standing inside the corner ice cream shop on Monroe Street. She had walked there with $1 in quarters clutched tight in her palm, rehearsing the order for a single scoop of strawberry in a cup. She had made it to the counter, just behind a man in a suit, and then, suddenly, a hand on her shoulder. "Sweetheart," the woman behind the counter had said, not kindly, "you can't loiter here. You're making customers nervous." She remembered the look in the man's eyes. He didn't say anything. Didn't need to. She had counted wrong, she was told. Didn't belong, she was shown. And she had learned. Danielle opened her eyes, the kitchen coming back into focus. She looked down at her hands. They were no longer small and shaking. They were strong, capable. She had built a life with those hands, built a name. Still, some rooms made her feel like the 12-year-old girl again, waiting to be asked to leave. Her phone buzzed. A calendar alert. Weekly DEI review, Skybright Airways. She almost laughed. Almost. Pivotal Equity, her firm, had been contracted to audit corporate diversity and equity policies for major companies across the Southeast. Skybright was on the list. They had submitted glowing numbers, diversity ratios, inclusion policies, satisfaction surveys, all the boxes checked. But numbers, Danielle knew, could lie. Or at least, they could conveniently leave things out. Her assistant had called earlier in the day before the flight. "Just a heads up," he said. "Skybright's on the quarterly watch list. Their data looks fine, but I've heard whispers from staff. Something feels off." She had nodded, distracted at the time. Now the pieces began to take shape. The delay, the stare, the man in shorts who breezed through, the smile Rachel saved for someone else. She told herself she'd just file it away, document the experience, add a line to the report. But then her phone buzzed again, an automated thank you email from Skybright's system. "Thank you for flying with us, Mr. Parker. We appreciate your business." Her breath caught in her throat. Mr. Parker. They didn't even see her. Not really. Danielle stared at the screen. The cursor blinked back at her like a dare. She thought of her father again, how he would smooth his tie before church, even when he knew the pews would stay half empty near him. How he never raised his voice, even when he should have. He'd told her once, "Sometimes silence keeps you safe, but sometimes silence keeps you small." Danielle closed the laptop and leaned back in her chair. This silence, this time, it wouldn't save anyone. Not anymore. Monday mornings at Pivotal Equity always started the same way. Quiet keyboards, muted conference calls, and the low hum of the espresso machine down the hall. Danielle had built the place to be different from the corporate offices she had once worked in. Here, the walls weren't glass to show off success. They were lined with books, case studies, and the stories of people whose names didn't make headlines. She stepped into her office, set her bag down, and closed the door behind her. For a moment, she just stood there, eyes drifting toward the framed photo of her father on the windowsill. He was smiling in the picture, one hand resting on the back of a kitchen chair, as if he'd just finished telling a story and was waiting to see if she understood the point. Danielle booted up her computer. Her inbox blinked. 37 unread emails, 3 calendar alerts, 1 flagged reminder. Skybright DEI review. Pending update. She could have written the report in her sleep. She'd reviewed their submitted materials last quarter. On paper, they were a dream. Above average representation, glowing staff feedback, polished public statements. But she knew the difference between compliance and conviction. One looked good on a spreadsheet. The other lived in the way a person smiled, or didn't, at a woman standing at the first-class counter. Still, she hesitated. Danielle clicked open the internal system and typed in Skybright's name. A list of flagged incidents from anonymous employee feedback flickered onto the screen. Most were generic: conflict with supervisors, lack of advancement opportunities. But one, dated 6 months earlier, made her pause. Passengers of color are frequently reassigned under technical errors. No one talks about it, but we all know. It happens. No one wants to be the one who says it out loud. She leaned back, fingers steepled under her chin. She hadn't told anyone at Pivotal what happened at the airport. Not her assistant, not the legal team, not even her closest analyst who handled Skybright's data set. Because if she said it aloud, it would no longer be a personal insult. It would become evidence. And evidence required action. Danielle closed the laptop softly, as if it might overhear her doubts. She needed air. Downstairs, she slipped into a small coffee shop tucked beside the lobby. The floor was uneven in spots, and the tables wobbled slightly if you leaned too hard on one side. But the place had a kindness to it. Chalkboard menus, handwritten quotes by Maya Angelou and Rumi taped above the register. Behind the counter was a young man with dark eyes and a quiet presence. His name tag read Fayyad. He looked up as she approached. For a second, there was recognition, but he didn't say anything until after he handed her the cup. "You were at Charlotte Douglas last Thursday, right?" His voice was low, careful. Danielle froze for just a moment. "I was." He hesitated, then added, "At the Skybright counter. They made you wait. Twice." Her heart caught in her chest. "I should have said something," he continued. "I was just cleaning up near the vending machines. I didn't want to get in trouble, but I saw it." Danielle didn't answer right away. She just nodded. He leaned a little closer, voice dropping. "I work nights at the airport. That kind of thing, it happens. More than you'd think." The cup in her hand felt heavier than before, not from the coffee, but from the weight of being seen. Back upstairs, she sat at her desk long after her coffee had gone cold. Fayyad's words echoed louder than the ticking of the clock on the wall. "It happens. More than you'd think." She opened the audit portal again. Through Pivotal's data partnership agreements, she had indirect access to airport incident logs, mostly for training audits, sometimes for compliance reviews. She searched by date, by terminal, by gate. The files appeared, time-stamped and neat. But one file, one that should have captured the moment at the counter, was missing the first 5 minutes of footage. A technical glitch, perhaps, or a choice. She sat back in her chair and stared at the screen. In that silence, she realized something she hadn't let herself admit before. Not just that what had happened to her wasn't personal, but that it wasn't rare. It was systemic, predictable, rehearsed. And if she stayed quiet now, it wouldn't stop. It would multiply, unnoticed. For the first time in a long while, Danielle didn't feel alone. But she did feel responsible. Because once you know, really know, you don't get to look away. The hum of the central system server room had always reminded Danielle of rain. Constant, quiet, but powerful. It was the place where truths lived before they were shaped into reports, and where data didn't lie, unless someone made it. Danielle sat alone in her glass-walled office, the blinds drawn halfway to blur the world outside. She had just submitted a formal request to the DEI analysis team, a pattern search of passenger seating conflicts reported at Skybright Airways in the last 90 days, sorted by race, gender, and destination. No explanations, no preamble, just the facts. She had done this 100 times before, but today it felt different. Today she was looking for herself. In another part of Charlotte, at Gate 14 of the regional terminal, Rachel Thornton leaned against the service counter with a half-empty cup of Diet Dr. Pepper. Her hair was pulled tight into a ponytail, and the corners of her lips curled in amusement as she spoke to Liam, a junior boarding agent with a nervous laugh and a habit of looking away during uncomfortable moments. "The lady from last week," Rachel said, flipping through a passenger log with one manicured finger, "waltzed in like she was royalty. Expensive bag, tailored blazer, thought dressing up could buy her a seat in first. Poor thing. Liam chuckled, though it sounded more like a cough. Guess she didn't have the right kind of frequent flyer miles, he muttered, eyes darting toward the camera dome on the ceiling. Rachel rolled her eyes. People need to learn. Just because the system scans you in doesn't mean you belong. Neither of them noticed Gloria. She moved slowly, pushing a mop across the floor with the kind of patience that comes from being invisible. A woman in her 60s with aching knees and calloused hands, Gloria had spent nearly 20 years scrubbing terminals and hearing everything, what people said when they thought no one important was listening. That night, she would sit alone in the break room and replay those words. She wouldn't write them down. She'd carry them quietly, like a secret that wasn't hers but hurt all the same. Back at Pivotal, Danielle stared at her screen. The preliminary findings had just landed. Dozens of flagged feedback entries from sky-bright passengers identifying as Black or Latinx. A pattern emerged. Seat reassigned due to internal update. No apologies, no explanations. She clicked on one record, then another, then a third. Each told a story in few words, but together they formed something louder. She rubbed the back of her neck, feeling the pull of tension from hours spent in that chair, reading complaint after complaint that echoed her own. Then her internal messenger pinged. A name she didn't recognize appeared in the subject line. David Tran, IT contractor, CLT Airport Systems. The message was short. I work nights on back-end security and maintenance. The file you're missing? It was cut, flagged for sensitivity reasons. But I pulled a cached copy before the purge. I didn't know who you were until I saw your internal request. There was a link. Danielle hesitated only a moment before clicking. The video opened in a secure viewer, low angle, wide frame. She watched as passengers lined up at the counter. There she was, standing straight, offering her boarding pass. Rachel glanced at her ID, then reached for the phone. Then the camera caught the next interaction. A man in khaki shorts stepped up. No ID checked, no delay. Rachel's posture relaxed. She smiled. Danielle watched herself move aside. She watched it like it was happening to someone else. Someone who looked like her, dressed like her, but didn't yet know what was being taken from her, one subtle gesture at a time. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She saved the file, encrypted it, and filed it into the internal review archive. The truth was now recorded, but more importantly, it had been seen, not just by her, because now the ones who used to watch in silence were starting to speak. And silence, when it's shared, becomes something else entirely. It becomes witness. Danielle had always believed that truth was like oxygen. It didn't always announce itself, but without it, nothing survived for long. And now the truth sat quietly in her hands, not as a weapon, but as a decision waiting to be made. She hadn't released the video yet. That would be too easy, too loud. Instead, she forwarded it to Pivotal Equity's legal division, a team of 3 women and 1 man who had walked beside her since the early days, when the organization operated from her basement and ran on too much coffee and not enough sleep. Within 20 minutes, the 4 of them were seated around the conference table, each with a copy of the footage. No one spoke at first. They didn't need to. The silence in the room was not awkward. It was reverent, like the kind that falls over a courtroom just before a verdict is read. Maya, the firm's senior counsel, was the first to speak. "This isn't a misunderstanding," she said softly. "It's a pattern, and now it's documented." Danielle nodded, her fingers laced tightly on the table in front of her. "We've submitted dozens of audits in the last 5 years," she said. "But this one, they'll fight back. They'll accuse us of bias, of playing the race card." "They always do," Maya replied. "But this time, we have more than numbers." Just then, a soft chime came from Danielle's laptop. A new message had landed in the public inbox of Pivotal's general contact form. Most of the time, it was junk. Job inquiries, speaking requests, newsletters. But this one was different. The subject line read, "I was there too." The sender, Ellen Brooks. Danielle blinked. Ellen Brooks was on the passenger manifest. First class, same flight. A woman in her late 60s, retired professor, according to the booking notes. She had sat across from Danielle that day, absorbed in a crossword and an oatmeal cookie. Danielle opened the email. I've debated writing this for days. I was at the counter that morning. I watched what happened, and I did nothing. I told myself I shouldn't interfere, that I didn't know the full story, but I haven't slept since. My hearing aid model records audio automatically for clarity adjustments. I usually delete the files, but something made me save this one. Maybe guilt, maybe grace. Either way, I think you should have it. Attached was an audio file, clipped but clear. Danielle listened once, then again. She didn't need to. The line was unmistakable. Rachel's voice, low and pointed. She doesn't look like someone who belongs in this part of the airport. The sound that followed wasn't a gasp or an objection. It was laughter. Liam's. Danielle forwarded the file to legal without commentary. And then, for the first time since this began, she made a choice that didn't ask for permission. She initiated a full system audit request of Skybright Airways. The formal language read, alleged recurring discriminatory practices in passenger treatment based on perceived race or socioeconomic status. Evidence submitted. Immediate compliance review required. She signed it herself. By the end of the day, Skybright's PR division had issued a public statement calling it a routine review process. Their spokesperson, a man named Philip Grant with a tidy haircut and a voice like warm static, stood at a podium and used phrases like technical miscommunication and regrettable lapse in procedure. But the world no longer moved at corporate pace. By dusk, the video had been leaked. Someone from legal or IT or maybe Ellen herself. No one knew for sure. And the audio file? It showed up on social media as a subtitled reel, clipped to 30 seconds, played alongside a still frame of Danielle standing at the gate. The public reacted. Some comments burned with outrage, others with denial, but the most powerful ones were the quiet acknowledgments. This happened to my sister. My father flew every week for work, and it still happened to him. I've seen this. I've never known what to call it. Now I do. Danielle didn't speak to the press. She didn't tweet or make a statement. She didn't need to. Because in every movement that mattered, there came a point where silence became a choice. And that choice changed everything. They had counted on people not noticing. They had counted on people not caring. But this time, the person who had once stayed silent didn't stay silent at all. And sometimes it only takes one voice to make the others remember they have their own. The conference room overlooked the city, glass walls stretching high like the ambitions of those who filled its chairs. The view was breathtaking, if one were in the mood to admire it. Danielle Parker was not. She sat at the long mahogany table, flanked by silence and scrutiny. Across from her were 7 men, white, suited, and seasoned in the art of polite dismissal. They didn't shout. They didn't accuse. They simply spoke as if truth could be managed like PR fallout. Michael Lane cleared his throat and folded his hands as if preparing to say grace before a meal. Ms. Parker, we respect your leadership, truly, and we recognize that what happened to you was unfortunate. But let's not forget, we're all adults here, professionals. Surely this can be handled discreetly without unnecessary escalation. Danielle didn't flinch. She didn't smile. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. Nothing flashy, just a plain manila shell that held more weight than any of the suits across the table realized. She opened it slowly, deliberately, like turning the first page of a book no one wanted to read. Inside, 27 individual reports. Names, dates, seat numbers, all from customers of color. All referencing the same phrase. Your seat has been reassigned due to an internal update. She slid the folder toward Michael. He didn't reach for it. I've reviewed your policy documents, Danielle said, voice calm but sharpened by months of silence. You claim to operate on a zero-tolerance framework for discrimination. But 27 people in 90 days is not a framework, it's a pattern. Around the table, a few men shifted in their seats. One coughed. Another looked down at his phone, perhaps hoping for an email to save him. Michael finally spoke. We believe these incidents were isolated. The employees involved are not the problem, Danielle interrupted, not harshly but with precision. The culture that enabled them is. Outside that room, the storm had already begun to gather. Rachel Thornton had been suspended. Pending review, they called it. Liam now worked baggage claim on the overnight shift. quietly removed from the front lines. But these were moves made to calm optics, not to address rot, and the media wasn't buying it. Within hours of Danielle's audit submission, news outlets began reporting on the trend. Headlines shifted from "Sky Bright incident under review" to "Pattern of racial discrimination emerges at National Airline." Reporters began contacting former employees. Customers from as far back as 3 years ago began posting their stories online. Hashtags formed, and with them, a chorus of voices long ignored. Danielle didn't seek the spotlight. She never had. But the spotlight had found her now. And when the National Corporate Equity Advisory Council called, asking her to speak on systemic bias in Fortune 500 companies, she said yes without hesitating. She didn't rehearse a speech. She remembered her father instead, how he once told her that sometimes justice didn't arrive with noise and gavel strikes, but with a woman standing where she once would have backed away. So there she stood, in a hall of polished stone and cold lighting, addressing an audience that looked more like a boardroom than a battleground. Her voice didn't tremble. It didn't rise. It simply filled the room like a slow tide. This isn't about one employee or one airline. It's about a pattern of subtle exclusions masked as procedure. It's about the thousand paper cuts of being told, in ways that are never written down, that you don't belong. And it's about deciding that silence is no longer the safer choice. She didn't expect applause. She wasn't there for that. What she noticed instead were the eyes. Some widened, some lowered, some blinking harder than usual. That night, Danielle didn't sleep, not because of anxiety, but because her mind wouldn't stop replaying the moment she laid those reports on the table. She had walked into that room thinking she might be heard. She left realizing she'd already been seen. And now there was no going back. Not for her, not for them, not for the world that had finally started asking why. The hearing room was cold, not in temperature, but in its formality: marble floors, navy suits, and carefully neutral expressions. A nameplate in front of Danielle read Danielle Parker, Director, Pivotal Equity. But that morning she wasn't here as a director. She was here as a Black woman who had spent her entire life being told to shrink, to smooth over discomfort, to be the bigger person. She rose slowly when her name was called. No podium, no script. Just her voice, and a story that had waited too long to be told. "I wasn't mistaken," she began. "I wasn't disruptive. I wasn't late. I had the right boarding pass, the right ID, the right to be there. And yet, at that counter, I was treated like I didn't belong, because to someone else's eyes, I didn't look like first class." A murmur swept the room, not loud but present. Danielle didn't pause. They say what you lose in moments like that is time, convenience, a seat. But what I lost that day was the respect I had spent a lifetime earning. And the frightening part? It wasn't a dramatic scene. It was ordinary, polite, routine. That's what made it so dangerous. She clicked her small remote. The projector behind her lit up. The video played, silent but damning. The smile Rachel gave the man in cargo shorts. The way her shoulders shifted, tense, hard, as Danielle stepped forward. The unnecessary ID checks. The denial, wrapped in vague language and corporate indifference. Then the audio file. A tinny recording, but clear. "She doesn't look like someone who belongs up here." Silence fell like a dropped glass. Danielle let it linger. She wasn't here to perform. She was here to be heard. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "I'm not here to call for boycotts. I'm not here to dismantle a company. I'm here because no one should have to carry the burden of proof for their own humanity." She placed a single-page document on the lectern. "These are 4 steps we can take, real steps. Training that works, not the kind you check off in an online module. Anonymous reviews of frontline staff, independent audits, whistleblower protections that don't end careers." Several members of the council leaned forward. Some nodded. Others looked away. She saw the hesitation, not disbelief, but the dawning awareness that this wasn't just her story. It was one they'd helped create, or at the very least, ignored. Later that afternoon, inside Skybright's offices, things were shifting. Ava Delgado, the company's head of internal HR, a woman whose own journey had been forged through ceilings made of glass and barbed assumptions, sent an official memorandum to the executive team. Her subject line read simply, "Failure to act will cost us more than reputation." She listed the names, Rachel Thornton, Michael Lane, the review committee that had dismissed early reports without escalation. Her final line struck like thunder. "If these matters are not pursued fully, I will resign my position on the Internal Equity Board, effective immediately." Rachel refused to apologize. In a closed-door meeting, she repeated her mantra, "I followed protocol." But now protocol was no longer a shield. Michael Lane's name was quietly removed from upcoming press releases. His calendar wiped clean. Rachel was escorted from the building by security. No ceremony, no statements. Just a quiet folding of consequence. That night, as Danielle sat on her porch with a cup of tea going cold in her hands, her inbox chimed. It was an email from someone she didn't know. Gloria Ramirez, the custodian at Skybright's Charlotte terminal. "I was there that day," the email began. "Not in the center, but off to the side. I didn't think what I saw mattered, but now I know even the quietest gaze has a place in justice. Thank you for seeing what the rest of us have lived through." Danielle read it twice, and for the first time in weeks, she let herself exhale. They told her not to make it a big deal, but the truth was, it had never been about making it big. It had only ever been about making it real. And now that it was, there was no putting it back. The wind that rolled through Charlotte in late March wasn't harsh, just persistent, the kind that tugged lightly at collars and reminded you seasons were changing, whether you were ready or not. Danielle Parker stood just outside the old brick building on Monroe Road, one hand resting on the rusted metal railing, the other cradling a worn leather notebook. It was the same community hall where her father used to hold GED classes for veterans who'd been handed medals but denied dignity. The folding chairs inside hadn't changed. The walls still held faded posters about justice, literacy, and voting rights. But the room had a different energy now, quieter, more searching. That evening, Danielle was not a director, not a headline, not a symbol. She was just a woman opening a workshop titled Recognizing Injustice in Everyday Life. The attendees arrived without fanfare. A retired nurse in orthopedic sneakers, a college student with a face still baby-soft but eyes already tired, a janitor who sat closest to the door, a single mother in scrubs who didn't take off her coat, as if she might need to leave at any moment. Each person carried their own story, mostly unwritten, some buried so deep they'd forgotten where. Danielle began not with a speech but with a question. When did you first feel like someone decided who you were, without asking? No one spoke at first, but then the nurse raised her hand. "A teacher once assumed I was cheating because my essay was too good." The student said, "I applied for housing last year. They said the list was full, but somehow my roommate, same age, same income, but white, got in." The mother looked down, then simply said, "At the pharmacy. Every time. They asked me 3 times to confirm I'm on Medicaid. Every time Danielle didn't correct, didn't comfort, she just listened and nodded." Later during break, she noticed someone slipping into the back row, a woman with silvering hair and a scarf wrapped carefully around her neck. Ellen Brooks, the same woman who had once said nothing and then, weeks later, said everything. Their eyes met, and a quiet smile passed between them. It said more than any podium could. Danielle continued with the next exercise. What power do you have that someone else once denied you? She didn't expect answers. Sometimes just asking the right questions was enough. After the session, while folding chairs creaked and paper cups were tossed, Danielle pulled the leather notebook from her bag. Her father's handwriting, deliberate, slanted, filled with discipline, still lined its pages. She turned to the last blank one, wrote a single line, then closed it and crossed the room to a teenage boy who'd sat in silence the entire evening, sketching lines on his notebook like he was too afraid to speak but too restless to stay still. She held out the book. "I want you to have this," she said gently. "My father taught me that you don't need to shout to be heard, but you do need to remember who you are." The boy looked at her hesitant, then nodded. He cradled the notebook the way people hold something fragile, not because it might break, but because they might. Danielle stepped outside as the sun dipped behind the edge of the city skyline. She didn't expect applause or even acknowledgement. No press release would mention this night, no trending hashtag would follow, but for the first time in a long while, she felt the shift not in headlines, but in something deeper. People had begun watching her, not to judge her presence or question her place, but to learn. And she realized then, justice wasn't a destination, it was a posture, and this time she wasn't standing alone. She never raised her voice, never demanded an apology. Danielle simply stood still, so the truth could be seen. In a world where power often wears a polished badge or a boardroom title, she reminded us that dignity doesn't need permission to exist. It just needs someone brave enough to stop apologizing for it. If this story touched something in you, maybe a memory, a question, or even a quiet truth, please subscribe to Undercover Truths to walk with us through more untold journeys. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next story.